how we use creating financing. I'm gonna actually show you different kind of creative financing strategy. There is just one important thing for seller financing, and that is to ask the seller. It shouldn't be any mortgage on this property. You could increase the value of this property to 1.3 million. Hi, my name is Alex Asgari, and today I'm going to talk about the creating financing with you, how we use creating financing, when exactly we use creating financing. I'm going to actually show you a couple of examples of the creating financing that we use, and we are going to actually talk about the different terms and method that we use in our creating financing. Imagine that you want to buy a property, but you don't have enough down payment for the property. Or imagine that you don't have a very good credit, but you have cash, you have enough cash to buy a property. Or there is a distressed property that you want to buy, and the seller want to close the property in 15 days, and you don't have enough time to go to the bank and get approved for the loan. Or imagine that you have a commercial property that you want to buy, but the document, the financial document, is not actually enough to go to the bank and get a loan for the property. Usually, real estate agents are not very good source to actually learn about creating financing. And also, the sellers are not very good source to actually learn from them about creating financing, and most of the times they don't know anything about creating financing. So it's up to you to actually learn about creating financing and actually talk to the seller and teach them how to use creating financing and apply creating financing in most of your deals. In this video, I'm going to actually show you a different kind of creative financing strategy. I'm going to actually show you how to structure the deal with little money or no money. I'm going to actually show you how to finance a distressed property, and we are going to talk about the most important things you need to know when structuring the deal, and why would a seller consider creating financing. And we are going to talk about one secret to creating financing deals, and we are going to talk about the power of creating financing strategy. Okay, what is the power of creating financing strategies? Imagine that you want to buy a property, but you don't have enough down payment. What's going to happen? You can't close the deal. But with creating financing, you can close the deal. So this is the power of creating financing. Or you want to actually buy a property, you have cash, you have enough money, but you have a bad credit. What's going to happen? You can't go to the bank and get a loan. So in most of the cases, they don't give you a loan, so you can't close the deal. So the power of creating financing is using the seller or asking the seller to act as a bank for you, or get a second mortgage from the seller, or get the first mortgage from the seller, or actually use the rent to own creative financing method to close the deal. There is just one important thing for seller financing, and that is to ask the seller. You can ask the seller if he's open to seller financing, and the way that you're actually asking it is, Mr. Seller, would you be open to any type of seller financing? And if he's saying yes, what do you have in mind? You can say, I'm not sure yet. I just wanted to know if you're open to any seller financing, and I'll get back to you on that later on. So if you ask the seller for seller financing and the seller doesn't accept it and he would say no, it doesn't mean that he doesn't accept the seller financing. It means that he might accept the seller financing later on, and you have to explain the seller financing to the seller, and you have to actually tell him what kind of benefit it has for the seller if he actually give you the seller financing. But never ask for seller financing on the first phone call that you have with the seller, because if you ask the seller for seller financing on the first phone call that you have with him, you might scare the seller that he might think that you don't have enough money or you don't have enough financing to actually close the deal. There are 3 different creative strategies that you can use in your purchase to actually close the deal. The first one would be if the owner carried the first mortgage for you. In that case, the owner would be a bank for you, and you can close the deal with very little down payment if you agreed with the seller. Imagine you want to buy a property, $1 million property, and you just have 10% to put down as a down payment, and the rest of the money you can actually get it from the seller if the property is free and clear and if there is no mortgage on that property. In that case, you get the loan of $900K from the seller, and the seller would actually act as a bank for you, so you just put down 10% and you get the money from the seller. The second type of creating financing is if the owner carried a second mortgage for you. So imagine that you want to buy the property which is $1 million. You go to the bank and the bank asks for 25% down payment. You just have 15% and you don't have the rest of 10% down payment. So you ask the seller to give you the second mortgage, to give you that 10% down payment, and he can carry the second mortgage for you on that purchase. Or you can use the rent to buy strategy, which in that case you actually rent the property and eventually you become the owner of the property, and that's one of the other creative way that we use to actually purchase the property creatively. Now we are going to actually give you an example about owner carry first mortgage. Imagine that we purchase a property, or we want to purchase a property which is 8 units. It's 8 units apartment, and the price of that 8 units is $1 million. Imagine that the rent for each unit is $1,500 for each unit, which is, if we multiply this by 8 units and we multiply that by 12, it's going to be $144,000. So this is the income, the yearly income, which is $144,000. And imagine that our expenses for this property is 40%, the 40% expenses. If we subtract these two, the $86,000 would be our net operating income. And imagine that this apartment is actually free and clear in terms of mortgage. So it means the seller doesn't have any mortgage on this property. And you ask the seller if he can carry the first mortgage for this property. So he accepts your offer, and you can actually tell him that you want to pay 10%, because if you wanted to go to the bank and get a loan for this property, you should actually put down 20 to 25%. But because this is a free and clear property, the seller agreed to pay him 10%. So what is the mortgage for this property? The mortgage for this property would be $900,000, because you just put down 10% and the owner carried the first mortgage for you. And so it means that the owner actually act as a bank for you in this example. And the cash flow for this property would be, so imagine we got a mortgage from the seller, 5%, 30 years amortization, and the monthly payment for this would be $4,200, which if we multiply that by 12, it would be almost around $50,000 a year, which is actually the mortgage, the annual mortgage for this property. So if you subtract the annual, so this is actually this is a net operating income. This is the annual mortgage that you pay for the property to the seller. And if you subtract these two, you get the cash flow. So if you subtract the 50,000 from the 86,000, it would be $36,000, and this is your cash flow for the property. So if you want to actually know what is your cash on cash return for the property or ROI for the property, it would be how much you put down for the property, 100K, and how much was your return? 36. So the cash flow was 36. So 36 divided by 100, so this is 36%. So this is a very good return for this property, and you just put down 10%. So you use creative financing for this deal. If you couldn't actually use the creative financing, you couldn't close the deal because you just had 100K to actually put down as a down payment, and the bank wouldn't actually accept that 100K from you. But because you negotiated with the seller and the seller was motivated to sell the property, and the seller wanted to get his price, which is $1 million, he agreed to actually give you the down payment of 10%, and he acted as a bank for you, and he is getting $4,200 a month from you for this property, and you agreed to actually pay the seller back in 5 years with refinancing the property and paying him back, because in 5 years the amount of the price of the property with the work that you're actually doing in that property would be $1,300,000. And in that case, you can go to the bank and you can refinance this property. And if you refinance the property, the bank would give you almost $1 million, which with this $1 million, you would actually pay the seller the amount of $900 that you borrow from him, and you would left with $100K to purchase your next property. So the creating financing way helped you a lot to actually close the deal, and with refinancing in 3 to 5 years, you would be able to actually pay the seller back in 3 to 5 years and get the cash out to actually go and purchase your next property. So what is important in this kind of properties? First, the property should be free and clear property. It shouldn't be any mortgage on this property. Otherwise, you couldn't actually use these terms. You couldn't use the creative financing. And in most of the cases, you can use this method in distressed owner property. In distressed owner's property, you can usually use this because in that case, the owner either wanted to actually close the deal very soon, or the property doesn't worth $1 million. it's worth actually 900, but you use the creative financing and you increase the value. You buy 1 million, which is actually worth 900, but eventually at the end of the road, you increase the price of the property. And when you're looking at it in 5 years period or 10 years period, is very much worth it to actually pay a little bit more to the seller and close the deal with your down payment and increase the value and do the refinancing later on. And usually the people who use this method, they have little money or little cash. They have little cash, or they have no credit. In that case, they usually use this method. Or, as I told you, if the seller doesn't want to pay the capital gain penalty, you can use this method to actually close the deal, or you can offer the seller the installment sales method, which in that case you actually offer the seller that because you don't want to actually pay the capital gain on this property, we can pay you in 5 years, each year 20% of the value of the property, which in that case you don't have to pay the capital gain tax. Or in a lot of other terms, based on the seller situation, you can use this method to actually close the deal. Okay, now we are going to give you an example about owner carry second mortgage. What is this exactly? Imagine that you want to buy 8 units apartment, and it's actually $1 million. And you go to the bank asks you for down payment of 25%, which is going to be $250,000. So this is your purchase price, and this is the down payment that bank need for you to actually put down in order for you to get a loan. But you just have 100K or 100,000. What will you do in that case? What is your option? You just have 100K, you need 250. In that case, you need to actually use the creative financing. So you need to actually talk to the seller. If it's a motivated seller, you can get a loan from him with the amount of 150K, and this would be your second mortgage. This is your second mortgage, which you have to bring to your calculation when you want to actually calculate the cash flow or any other expenses that you have for the property. So why the seller give you the second mortgage? In what cases the seller agrees to actually give you the second mortgage? It's when the seller is motivated. Why the seller should be motivated? Imagine the seller want to relocate to another location, and he has to do it very fast. Or the price of the property is not 1 million, but he won the 1 million, but the actual price is 900. So you pay a little bit more, but you close the property and you bring the value in a couple of years to 1,200,000 or 1,100,000. You know this is an upside property, and you can add the value very much in that property based on the calculation that you did. So, or if you have less down payment for the property, so you have a shortage of down payment, So in that case, you have to use the actually creating financing or owner carries first or second mortgage. This is one of the most important things that you have to know if you have a shortage on down payment, or if you have a bad credit. If you have a bad credit, that banks need more down payment from you. And it's actually very funny that when you're using creating financing, you have a higher cash on cash return. When you calculate the cash on cash return on 100,000 down payment, when you're actually putting down 250 down payment, 250K down payment, when you compare these two, it's actually more than double when you're putting down less money in the property. Okay, and let's say in this property, if you could increase the value of this property to 1.3 million in, let's say, 3 years period. So if you could bring the price to 1.3 million in 3 years, so it's a add value property, which means you can add the value in 3 years. And if you could increase the value to 1.3, you can refinance the property at that point, and you could actually pay your seller and the bank back. So you would pay the bank as well, and you would left with 300,000, which you could use to buy another property, another add value property, which in that case you can repeat this process to purchase more property more creatively, to actually have a lot of property in short period of time. Thank you very much for your time, and see you in next episode.